I was 13 years old when the Stargate movie hit theaters in 1994. Me, being a huge science fiction nerd back then, and still am, my parents took me to theaters not too terribly long after it first came out. And let me tell you, the moment Jay Davidson stepped down from a podium wearing a magnificent costume, my eyes were utterly glued. I was so mesmerized by his costumes and his presence that my little teenage brain didn't pay attention to anything else for the entire rest of the movie. Now, at that point in my life, I had already had a few inklings, questions, and thoughts to myself about what my ideal partner would look and behave like, and perhaps what might have been under said robes or clothing. But I can't honestly say that it was watching Stargate or The Crying Game that turned me bisexual as a youth. Hello everyone, once again it's your girl Egodram. Welcome to another video, and I am going somewhere with this, hear me out. The past week-ish on TikTok, I have seen some of the most unhinged bisexual discourse. Post-Pride, I would have expected something like this to happen during Pride Month, but for some strange reason, just this past week, bisexuals, in particular bisexual men, have been thrown on the grill like pieces of meat. I couldn't tell you exactly when it started or why. I have a rough idea who. Not just one who, a collective of who's. Apparently, the discourse as to whether or not dating a bisexual man is rape. You heard that right. That is part of the conversation happening right now. Was apparently brought up by multiple straight women on TikTok, supposedly making multiple claims that they would not date a bisexual man out of concerns about being cheated on by both other women and other men, and the usual biphobic crap I've been hearing my entire life. Now, I myself have been out, relatively speaking, for the past 20 years about being bisexual, and even though I am not a man, I feel somewhat obligated to chime in here. And yes, that "you'll just cheat on me with both sexes" tripe is exactly that. Tripe. Because cheating is not an orientation. Cheating is a behavior. It's an incredibly crappy thing to do. Cheating is cheating. Straight people cheat, gay people cheat, bi people cheat, trans people cheat. It's cheating. It doesn't matter who with. It's still cheating. Cheating's cheating. It's just cheating. That's just what's up. Being bisexual is not so much a behavior as it is desires, preferences, either or. I could go with cake or I could go with ice cream. They're both amazing in different ways. If one happens to still be of the mindset of bisexuals need to pick a side, let me explain something to you. Quote unquote, picking a side is for fighting, not fucking. One is conflict, and the other is coitus. That's as close to Crayola mode as I'm going to get explaining this to you, okay? And when it comes to the definition of the term bisexual, I shouldn't have to bust out the crayons in order to elaborate on what that term means. And no, that is obviously not the same thing as being pansexual, because pansexual infers attraction to all genders, whereas bisexual implies and infers at least two. But moving on from that, I did look into yet another odd accusation that popped up in this whole bi men discourse. The claim that bisexual men are more likely to transmit STIs than gay or straight men. And I looked into this, and I Googled and gaggled and DuckDuckGo'd, and unfortunately, there's a chance that might be true. And I'm going to put the word "true" in air quotes here because I am referencing an article on the National Library of Medicine from 2021 alleging that bisexual men are less likely to seek out screening services than gay men. But the same study/article also seems to infer that there's not enough information being gathered specifically about bisexual men, because Lo and behold, bi erasure is a thing that happens in broader society, so of course it's going to affect the realm of medicine. It only appears to infer that that claim might be true because there's no other data nor interest to collect such that might infer or prove otherwise. Now, do you remember at the beginning of the video where I mentioned that seeing Jay Davidson as Ra in the Stargate movie was kind of sort of the capstone on my bisexual realization as a youth? I feel fortunate to have grown up in the 1990s as a teenager. Definitely had its pros, but also came with its cons. That era of our history was the height of AIDS and HIV panic. Lots of rumors going around, lots of fear and smear campaigns going around, lots of stigmas, lots of people dying in terrible, agonizing, and humiliating ways, while some realms of society cheered it on. So, in an effort to get young people to be more interested in using condoms and practicing safe sex, someone got the quote unquote brilliant idea in their head of coming up with this idea that going to bed with someone is going to bed with everyone they've ever gone to bed with. No, I did not jumble that. That was pretty much the campaign. If you meet a girl at a bar and take her back to your apartment to go to bed with her, you're going to bed with everyone she ever did. It's an inference that you could be catching something from someone else's past. And while biologically that it tends to be how diseases work, it also kind of fueled a little bit of shame. Shame-driven thought process. Yes, everybody has a history, but what this campaign did not really forethink was that some of that history might not have been consensual. And you can still catch diseases from rape. I hate that I have to censor myself so much on the internet this day and age, but yeah, people's pasts often, unfortunately, include rape. This train of thought, this mechanism of thinking how we anticipate intimacy with another human being, never really left our collective psyche after the 1990s, because while biologically true, regardless of sex or gender, that is still a human being that you are talking to, thinking of, emotionally involved with, and then intimately involved with. Yes, your actions and interactions matter, as does your attitude and mindset going into them. Your interpersonal relationships, romantic or otherwise, are no exception. And on a darker note, the last claim in this whole dumpster fire of discourse that I want to address is some straight women, are making the claim that a bisexual man who does not disclose whether or not he has been with another man is somehow equivocal to actual sexual assault is utterly bogus and outright insulting. How Darvo does your line of thinking have to be that because you aren't privy to some information that someone would rather kept secret is somehow equivocal to actual terrible abuse? How self-important and willfully ignorant does someone have to be that another person's past before they met you is somehow an attack on you as a person? More than 20 years ago, I had a boyfriend who would be enraged if I so much as mentioned having been with a person from my past, particularly males, sometimes females. It would just make him so angry. This is the same walking waste of DNA that put a scar on my face that I see every time I look in the mirror. That is what you sound like when you are making the claim that a bisexual person is committing an assault against you because they were with a member of the same sex in their past. That is what you sound like. You sound like a jealous, petty, possessive, petulant child of a person. That is what you sound like. That is what you are. You are not special. No self-respecting bisexual is going to give up such a fundamental part of their very being to appease your pride. And I am not going to try to stop you from clutching onto your flawed logic to justify your quote unquote preference for not wanting to date bisexuals, okay, clearly it's your preference to be ignorant. It's your preference to be a false ally. It's your preference to be duplicitous. And it's your preference to be called out for your internalized homophobia and perhaps even internalized misogyny. And you know what? Side note here. As a bisexual woman, let's all stop pretending that some, mind you, I said some lesbians aren't also awful to bisexual women. Nothing quite like being told by a woman who also likes women that I need to quote unquote decenter men while simultaneously being more obsessed with my hypothetical body count than a man. Okay? I am not going to force anyone to date me if they just don't want to. I am not going to force someone to be intimate with me if they don't want to, because doing so would make me a horrible person. But I am going to call you a horrible person if the only reason you wouldn't want to date me is because I happen to be bisexual, despite any other deeds or merits. If you harbor certain prejudices, that is not preference. That is just being ignorant and being a jerk. I am now going to close up this video about this particularly insane TikTok discourse on bisexuality to remind everyone watching and listening that this has happened before. In the summer of 2018, Twitter was besieged with the hashtag #DropTheB campaign, with a couple of memes floating around inferring that the B should be dropped from LGBT because there are more than just two genders, that gender is not necessarily a binary, that it is in fact a spectrum. Yes, gender is a spectrum, but the whole drop the B premise and campaign wasn't real. It was a 4chan psyop. I believe that the whole intent behind the Drop the B campaign was to get leftist circles, particularly the LGBT community, infighting, probably for the lulz, because that sounds like 4chan's motive, but it wasn't real, and people were buying into it. I don't know whether or not the people on TikTok making these claims genuinely believe them. I'm sure some of them do. But I can't dismiss the possibility that this whole thing started with yet another alt-right psyop, because it sounds like one to me. I mean, obviously they've done it before. Why wouldn't they attempt to do it again? And TikTok, more popular than ever, seems to be a damn near perfect avenue through which to do so. Listen, I'm not claiming that this whole thing is just another 4chan psyop, although I wouldn't be surprised if it was. I'm saying that a lot of people's biphobia and internalized everything is making itself public and making itself known. And in a time where this administration has made it more than abundantly clear they don't think any of us have a right to exist, keep calling it out. Be loud, be proud, be obnoxious, throw glitter in the air. Call it out. Continue to call it out. But be highly skeptical. Not cynical, skeptical. Remember, authoritarians of any stripe have been trying to tear our community apart for the better part of a century, if not longer. Do not let them succeed. It's your girl, Ego Dram. Enjoy the rest of your day. Be good to each other. You know, I really do mean that every time I say it. Be good to each other.